Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I hope you smiled today. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. It actually means even more to me than discount chocolate, which is saying something. So thank you very much. And you will probably recognize our guest for this episode because he was also our guest in last episode. Hey, Sam, welcome back.
Hello, thank you.
It is so nice. I love having Sam on. I always love talking to Sam. I learned so much from him anyway. But we got so much feedback from his last episode on authentication libraries that we had to extend it because there was a story, especially that we teased up that we didn't even get to because the conversation was so good. There's just so much into it. So I have a few little news updates I'm going to run through really quickly, and then I'm going to let Sam tell his a story, and then we're going to kick into something even bigger. Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's even bigger, but it's certainly quite large. So I'm going to run through that really, really quickly. First and foremost, if you didn't see last month's episode that we are teasing up right now, that is the very first link in our show notes. So go watch that. You will just learn so much. I learn so much every time. Secondly, we had an active exploitation that our CERT, our Security Intelligence and Response team, had found. It is an Aquabot variant, which is a Mirai variant. What is really interesting about this is it actually had a functionality that we've never seen before in a Mirai variant, and that is that it would report back to the C2 whenever a kill signal was detected. We have not currently seen a response back from the C2 since, at least as of right now, but we'll keep that blog updated in case we find one. Our first of our trilogy on our educational crypto miner series is also live. This one focuses more on the basics of blockchain and crypto in general. It's very, very informative, and we're going to be moving through some really exciting samples later series. So definitely read the background because it will help you so much. And last but certainly not least of the blogs is actually an extension of what we're mainly going to be talking about today, which is our first State of the Internet report of 2025 is live. And guess what? It is different than any other SOTI we've ever done before. And it is another reason that I had to have Sam on because he was a huge contributor to this report. So we'll get to that. But our last blog is an extension of this, of one of our sections, which was a VPN abuse. So it's called A Researcher's Journey, and it actually goes through Ben Barnea is one of our security researchers who went and studied VPNs and how they could be abused, not only for infiltration, but after exploitation as well. And it goes through his entire process. It's really, really interesting and very, very technical. And it gets to the point, not to spoil the ending here, but he can actually perma brick a VPN appliance. So you'll definitely want to see how he can do that. All right. Now that I have punched through super fast our news updates, let's get to the main part of what we were talking about, and that is our Defender's Guide. So before I kick it over to Sam, I want to kind of set the stage as to why it is different. Our typical State of the Internet reports focus on our trends and statistics and things that we have seen throughout the last amount of time on various topics based on our very unique view of the Internet. But this time, we pulled in people like Sam and people like Ben and our researchers who contribute very heavily to our blogs. And we wanted to provide a single source of technical, practical, mitigation-focused tips for defenders because it's really hard to find good information out there. And so pulling it all into one was very, very important. And Sam was so gracious to help us heavily with one of our sections on cross-site scripting. So before we jump into that, Sam, can you tell us how you got to Akamai?
Yeah, so um, this goes back to some of the SAML stuff we were talking about, right? And
Mm-hmm.
just to recap quick, um, it's all pretty much open source libraries, right? Reuse the same wheel. Don't go inventing your own because you're probably going to make a bad wheel anyway. Um, and the point was to, hey, make sure you're testing these libraries because you can reintroduce the same vulnerability over and over again. So
Mm-hmm.
at my I guess to accentuate this point, at my previous job, before I joined Akamai, they actually signed a contract to use EAA, or Akamai EAA to be specific. And EAA uses SAML to authenticate. And part of my job there as a penetration tester was to validate our single sign-on integrations with all the different applications. So I got assigned this one, and lo and behold, EAA was vulnerable to the signature wrapping attacks that we discussed last time, due to the open source library that was being used. In this case, I don't think it has been reintroduced. It's just always been there. But that it also shows, how important it is to validate your libraries that you use, because, if you build a house on sand, that whole analogy.
Yeah, Sam will fall down. That's
Yep.
what'll happen.
Yep. And then that isn't how I directly joined Akamai. I already had the job offer before all of that went public, and my hiring manager didn't have any idea about that because it's all, segregated and stuff
It
like
makes
that.
it even better.
I know, but it's still a fun story.
Yes, I love it. So definitely go watch our last episode and you'll understand why I wanted to bring this story in. When Sam and I were discussing our very first episode, that was one of the things that I found so fun, because it's a wonderful example of not only a real life threat, but we have to be honest here. This is going to happen, and we need to be able to deal. We need to be able to deal with it and move on. And so it's such a great story and a practical application, and we're really glad that we got you out of this whole thing too.
Me too.
Yeah, it's it kind of ties into a theme that I've been talking about a lot, which is vulnerabilities that may be seen as not really relevant anymore, and they're becoming extremely relevant because people didn't patch, or there were new technologies introduced, new places for vulnerabilities to hide. And one of those was something that we talked heavily about in the Defender's Guide, which is cross-site scripting. And I just love it. Your section is like, cross-site scripting is not dead. And I loved it because it really was surprising to me that some people would even say that it was dead, because it's on the OWASP top 10 still. And of course, combined in with other injection stuff, which just proves how ubiquitous they are. So would you start by just kind of talking about some of the myths about cross-site scripting is dead, or maybe why people believe that it's dead?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the narrative that cross-site scripting is dead or dying came from a few primary sources. First of all, there were JavaScript libraries that said they were cross-site scripting safe because of XYZ. Now, it is true that these libraries are more resilient to cross-site scripting, but that doesn't mean they're safe, right? You can still exploit it just the same. It just requires a few other hoops to jump through. The other main thing is that many of the big web browsers introduced, like XSS Auditor was one of them, and other like client-side things that prevented JavaScript from running in the browser, in the goal of protecting against cross-site scripting. Because the end victim of cross-site scripting is typically, the user, right? You get some phishing link that has cross-site scripting vulnerability in it, and then you steal their cookies to some website, right? So the goal of those browser tools were to prevent that. However, throughout their lifetime, they were plagued by false positives, not actually doing a good enough job preventing it. And then eventually all of the browsers have now deprecated those tools because they just weren't effective. So those two things combined kind of was pushing along this narrative that, hey, cross-site scripting is a thing of the past. It's not really worth going after anymore. But as we know here, and as I'm sure a lot of our customers know, it's definitely not a thing that's just gone away or has been mitigated fully, because, as like you said earlier, technology keeps on advancing. And just like technology advances, so do ways to exploit that technology, right? The way that we're seeing cross-site scripting exploited now is more by injecting directly within JavaScript strings instead of your classic, HTML, full HTML tags that contain, an event handler, and then it executes JavaScript. So now we're seeing, hey, I found a place where a website is reflecting client-controlled input within a string that's already inside JavaScript context. And that's how we're seeing a lot of these vulnerabilities come up nowadays.
Wow, yeah, that's so wild. So you mentioned before that like there were new hoops to jump through that maybe weren't before. Can you talk about some of those hoops that are newer?
Sure. One of the hoops I mentioned a little bit was kind of the injection point.
Mhm.
So a lot of your classic cross-site scripting payloads, they're a full HTML tag. They have an event handler on air, on load, and then you have alert, whatever. But now, one of the other hoops is instead of just reflecting that entire thing, you have to be the content or the input has to be reflected in a more specific area, specifically JavaScript strings, because
Yeah.
you can very easily just break out of that string using a quote, single tick, whatever, and then do whatever you want. You don't have to invoke JavaScript yourself. You're already in JavaScript context, so you don't have to spend the time to do that. And that's important because there are only a few well-known ways that you can actually that a payload can invoke JavaScript by itself. But if you're already in JavaScript, then you have a lot more flexibility because you can use the entirety of JavaScript, which makes it a lot harder to detect and mitigate.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the best way to do it is make it look like a legitimate process, right? I mean, if you're already within there, then the world's your oyster, so to
Yep.
speak. Um, so is that what you're seeing the most of? Because for those of you who didn't watch the last episode or don't know, Sam is integral to our WAF product. He builds it and makes sure not only builds it, makes it more optimized and better for everybody around, but he's also like very heavily involved in seeing what is coming in and building rules and things to protect against that. So what are you seeing the most of? Is it this? Is it JavaScript stuff?
Pretty much, yeah. Cross-site scripting, I don't know if it's just because there's more people looking for it, but when it comes to our customers asking us about things, it's typically cross-site scripting, because I'm assuming most of them have their own bug bounty programs, right? Most mature security organizations do that now these days. And they have people trying to make money looking for these things, which is good, right? And then, if something's found, they usually come talk to us, and then, we work together on a solution. But yeah, cross-site scripting and JavaScript via JavaScript strings is probably the most, the loudest thing we hear about, at least. Notwithstanding
Sure.
like CVEs and stuff that pop
Yeah,
up
yeah,
every
yeah.
once in a while, but on a day-to-day, it's cross-site scripting.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that the 0 days are what everybody likes to talk about, but they are not the biggest threat on your day to day. When a major 0 day vulnerability happens, the security community freaks out and shuts down, understandably trying to deal with it. But in the large grand scheme of things, it's so minimal comparatively to these day to day threats. So I'm glad. Thanks for hitting on that. We have just shy of 2 minutes left. So, is there any tips that you would provide to our listeners to maybe stay safer around cross-site scripting or anything else that you talked about today
Yeah.
or last time?
So we definitely go more in depth in it in the Defender's Guide, right? But I do provide some, I guess, guidance on how to prevent this. And I mean, the easiest way is just output encoding. If you can prevent an client-controlled input from breaking out of the string, then they can't do anything because they'll just be within the string context the whole time. So I think my recommendation would be definitely check out the Defender's Guide because we get a lot more in depth and talk about why things work, why things don't work, and just the craziness that you can do when you're already within JavaScript context.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that warms my heart to hear that is your suggestion. You definitely do want to read it. Of course, Sam's section is only one section of what we did. We brought together three major concepts of security in depth, which was host security, network architecture, and risk management. And we have unique research studies for each one of those sections, and it's very, very just jam-packed full of knowledge. I've read it so many times and yet I still learn something new when I go read it again. So
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely a great one. And with that, we are right at time. So thank you so much, Sam, and everybody watching here for joining us. I hope that your Valentine's Day, if you celebrate, was as wonderful as this show was. Come back on the 26th of March for our 17th episode. And of course, as I mentioned before, everything that we talked about today, including the Defender's Guide and our previous episode, is in the attachments tab. check out our SIG page on akamai.com. That's the best way to keep up to date with what we are doing here. And of course, bookmark our page so that you don't ever miss an awesome episode, because Sam's probably going to be coming back. And last but certainly not least, if you have a question, comment, concern, joke, even a song, drop it to us. We want to know. We want to know what you liked, what you didn't like, and maybe what else you'd like to see. brighttalk@akamai.com is the best way to do that directly. And thank you so much. Cybernara, y'all.